So, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Paul Henwood. I'm a cloud solution architect at Microsoft, and Grey Matter have kindly given me the opportunity to come and talk to you about Power BI today. So I'm going to spend probably the next 90 minutes or so, we'll see, talking about Power BI. So I think the first question from me is, who here has used Power BI before? All right, good number of hands. Okay, cool. How many of you have used it quite extensively then? Are you quite extensively? Interesting. Okay, so let's. I'm happy to field questions and things like that as well. So this is going to be an overview, and some of this will be a bit 101. So I guess at some points I'm going to break out into a couple of demos as well. If you've got specific questions and things like that, happy to field. Let me know. I'm happy to either answer throughout or after, whichever you prefer. So I think the first thing that I want to talk about is this statement here. 70% of organizations believe their data is not used to its fullest extent. So this is the first thing. And this is what I'd like to lead with and what I'd like to talk to from Power BI's perspective, is most organizations aren't really using all of their data. That is a clear statement that you can think in most places. And I think beyond that as well, you've also got the amount of data is growing. By 2025, we're talking about 163 zettabytes of data is going to have been generated. Data sources are growing. 86% are challenged to analyze their unstructured data. And the number one, data science and analytics are the most challenging to find. So there's lots of data, and people want to use that data for various purposes. But it's hard to do. The idea with Power BI is it's a unification of various different services, and there's different ways that you can modernize and use this to analyze your data. It starts with the fact that you can have self-service and enterprise BI. It supports both forms. This is about having self-service BI so every user in the organization can build their own reports. But also, it still supports enterprise BI. That's not going away. We still want those centralized corporate reports, which are reporting on your metrics for your entire business. And it supports both of those models. But not only that, we've integrated AI into it in many, many different ways. We saw from Jamie earlier the ways in which you can integrate AI and use cognitive services. But Power BI is about getting that AI functionality in the hands of the end users. This is about trying to make it accessible to everybody. And I'm going to go through the various ways in which AI is integrated into Power BI, some requiring more skills and some requiring really just a drag and drop UI. And the most important thing it enables is anyone can analyze and access data in the way that they want to from the device they want to. But the thing I want to start with is about building a data culture. It's not about just building a Power BI report for somebody and having them access and use the data. It's about building the desire and the appetite to have a data-driven culture in an organization. Once there is a buy-in and a desire to actually use data to drive and run the business, it is much easier not only to roll out and use the tool, but also for people to realize the value of using the tool as well. Because with any sort of change management, the realization is that somebody has to see value in what they're actually getting from the tool before they're going to start adopting it and using it. So driving that data culture is one of the most important things. And the feedback we actually get from our largest organizations, or most of the organizations we talk to, the first thing that you should have is buy-in from a corporate sponsor to actually drive the data-driven culture. Without that corporate sponsor, you have considerably more challenges when trying to roll out across the business. So if you're trying to roll out and use Power BI and have self-service BI in your organization, it's about having somebody higher up, somebody from the executive team who can actually support that. I think the thing, I'll cover it briefly, but in Microsoft we had that moment. We had that realization of change that we wanted to be a data-driven business. It was actually back in 2012, and our corporate sponsor was Amy Hood, our CFO. She's the person who decided we are going to start doing data from the top. And this is that they want to use data to drive and run their entire business, our entire business. And so this is the same sort of thing, the same sort of transition that you need to go through in your organizations or with your customers' organizations. So as I said before, the idea with Power BI is it's a unification of both self-service and corporate BI. It's one tool for both sets of people. So rather than having one tool used by your corporate BI and by your central BI teams, and then a different tool used by your front-end users, it's the same tool throughout the business. But importantly, because it's the same tool throughout the business, it's scalable. It can scale up and scale down to the various sizes that you require. And it can actually cope with the technologies that's actually used behind. It's powered by tools like SQL Server analysis services. That's the technology that's used, the in-memory technology that's used behind Power BI. So it's not just a 4-year-old technology that is Power BI. It has all the rich history of analysis services behind it, and its capabilities and its scalability. Not only that, we've integrated SSRS, SQL Server Reporting Services, or paginated reports, as you'll hear them called nowadays. But those are all integrated into the same tool as well. And you can push those all together and have that one front end. And the important thing here is that you want people to spend their time actually looking at the insights and actually analyzing that data. So we can integrate into any different tool. So the idea is that it should be available to look at not only on a web browser and on a mobile device, but also being integrated into Teams, into SharePoint, into other ways that people are interacting and using the data or the other tools on their day-to-day life. With AI, the idea is that you can make sense from unstructured data. So you can pull in things like images, and you can get captions, and you can also pull in data and do further analysis, very similar to kind of what Jamie demoed. A number of those are actually integrated directly into Power BI. But it's not just that, it's about being able to interact with the data in different ways as well. We talk about this natural language question, so the ability to literally ask a question of the data, rather than having to drag and use a drag and drop interface, is about being not only accessible to a wider audience, but also a different way to integrate. So you can actually ask a question, show me the total amount of sales for my country, or for this part of my organization. Whatever it may be, you can ask that natural language question. And the idea is that then using AI, you can actually have additional KPIs, additional metrics that you might not know about your data or see with your data, you can actually uncover with Power BI as well. And all of this is using shareable machine learning models. And behind the scenes, you'll see I'll actually be using some of the cognitive services that Jamie referenced, but using a simple interface in front of them. But also it can interact with things like Azure Machine Learning Service, where you actually have corporate data scientists building solutions for your business. You can integrate and use those in Power BI as well. So you have the ability to not only take something off the shelf, but take something bespoke for your organization and also integrate it with Power BI. And as I said before, the important thing is being able to analyze all data and access it where you need to. So there are hundreds of different data connectors we have for Power BI. But not only that, if you don't have a specific data connector you're looking for, there are generic connectors, ODBC, OData. Beyond that, you can actually create your own connectors. You can build your own, using .NET, you can actually build your own custom connector for whatever thing you're trying to access, put that layer on top of it, and use it inside Power BI as well. So you can really access any data. Not only that, it's available worldwide as well. So we have it available in lots and lots of different regions. So it's available in the UK and Europe, as you can see, which is most relevant for us here. But also, where relevant, you can also use it in other regions as well, if you're a global organization. So the way in which Power BI works is that you're deployed into a particular tenant, and that'll be where your organization's data will be stored. But using Power BI Premium, you have the ability to stand up a set of data in another region. So your core data could be in the UK, but if there's a specific requirement to look at some data in the US, you can provision some resources in the US and analyze and store your data in that location, or any of the locations that you can see on the screen. But not only that, we also meet lots of compliance and regulations as well. So things like if you're interested on whether it can be used by UK government, we've got GCloud 6, we've got ISO standards, HIPAA, lots of different compliance that should all be relevant for the people trying to use it. In terms of the data sources that I mentioned before, here's a sample of what they are all today. I believe that is a current full list. And you can see there that there are a number of flat files that you can connect to, the Excels, the XMLs. You can also connect to various different databases, be they Microsoft ones, or Oracle, IBM, Sybase, whatever it may be. Also all of our Azure services. It would be odd if our own product didn't work with our own cloud, so obviously we can connect to all of that. But also all those online services that you can see there as well, things like Azure DevOps, Salesforce, Dynamics, and lots of other locations as well. And then at the end, there are the generic connectors. So where you can actually see you've got things like an OData feed, a web connector, and those various ones on the far right-hand side for you. Obligatory slide, I think, here in terms of Power BI versus our competition, rated by the Gartner Magic Quadrant as a leader in analytics in the BI platforms. In 2019, we actually went slightly further ahead of our competition in terms of the vision and the direction that the product's actually going, especially with the integration of things like the AI products as well and the AI functionality. There are actually 2 of these marketing slides. I got rid of one of them, but I thought I would share it anyway. Something that's interesting to see is there are lots of our customers are actually using Power BI as well. So we have lots of people across the world actually using Power BI in all different industries, and it's relevant for all industries. So you can see that we've got people from manufacturing, such as Rolls-Royce or Aston Martin, but we've also got people from professional services or from banking, healthcare. So we've actually got lots of large customers using it in various different ways. In fact, I wanted to tell you about a few of them that we've actually got here. So one of them, Heathrow in the UK. Actually, a few people on my team, including myself at one point, actually worked with Heathrow on this. And they actually use Power BI to look at their movement of their baggage and their customers and people throughout the terminals. So the idea, you can actually read this case study, but the idea is that they can use this data to actually see where people are, see where bags are, so they can actually use it to run and direct people throughout the airport. Not just Heathrow, we've got Renault Sports are using it as well. They're actually using it to analyze their race data. So it's actually available to engineers and to people across Renault Sports, so they can actually analyze any data in the way that they want to. They've actually made it accessible, so effectively anyone can use the Power BI desktop tool and connect to a rich set of data they've got behind it. And then the last one is Metro Bank. Metro Bank use it to actually have a look at how their customers are interacting with their products and services and how they're actually using and interacting both in store and on the internet as well. So there are various ways. There's a few different industries there. There are lots of case studies. I've pulled out a few of them just to show you a few cross industries, but there's lots more that you can read up about as well. The thing that I would say with all of these is it wasn't magic. They actually had to have that data behind the scenes to be able to access. So Renault have their real-time data streamed from their race, from the race locations, and have it available real-time to their engineers that are actually based on site. There is a whole bit behind Power BI that makes all of that possible. Power BI is one part of that puzzle. Heathrow is another part. They had data spread out across the business. They had silos of data for their baggage, for their movement of people, for the airlines, and they had to collate all of that data before it's possible. So the reality is you do have to have that data. Power BI makes it easier to be able to access and use and report on, but you do need to have that data available to you. So let me show you a bit of Power BI rather than just talking about it. Let me show you an example for those that haven't seen it, or maybe to show a feature that, or two that you might not have seen before. I'll try not to throw my water on the laptop like Danielle did. So, this is an example of an executive dashboard. The idea is that we call this the single pane of glass, slightly cheesy, but I kind of like the sentiment anyway. The idea is that this is data that's being collated from various parts of the business to give a centralized view to a senior executive. In this instance, it's pulling data from the marketing teams, the sales teams, the operation teams, finance and HR. And the idea is this is some high-level KPIs and metrics that are used to run those various different departments. And if there's an area of interest where you can see that something's red or someone's not hitting a target, then they can drill in for more detail to actually have a look at it. So let's take the sales, for example. Let's look at actual versus target revenue. We can see we're actually below target here. So let's have a look at why. If I click into that dashboard item there, that tile, I basically drill into the underlying report so I can see the detail behind this. So I've got my pipeline reports here. What I can actually see here, I've got an opportunity value by pipeline phase down here. You can actually see if I just zoom in here, you can see that I've got this here. Now, what I'm concerned about is the fact that I seem to have 37 million tied up in the negotiation phase, and I need to find out why it's tied up in the negotiation phase so I can do something actionable. Again, it's all well and good having this data. If I can't take an action off of this data, there isn't much value in me actually just displaying this. I need to be able to actively do something with it. So what I can do is I can use this drill button here. I can drill into the 37 million. And what I can actually see from this is that Derek seems to have 10 million outstanding in the negotiation phase. So my action here is I can clearly follow up and, Derek, what are you doing? I can dig into that a little bit more. Same thing, I'll probably pick up on Joe and Vernon as well, if I'm honest with you. But I can actually drill into this data and I can do something actionable with it. Not only that, but you can. There's lots of different ways that you can build this. There's various different aspects to this report that exists, or this dashboard in this case. I can actually drill in to just look at my high-level sales data. So let me drill into my sales here. This is drilling from my high-level sales data into my detailed sales dashboard, where I've actually got even more information. And here I can have a look through my report and have a look at the data that I wanted to look at, and there was a particular item I wanted to click on, and I feel like I've clicked on the wrong item, so let me just go back up to the one before. It was this one I wanted to go into. I want to drill into the top customers by opportunity. Okay, so in this instance, I've got this top customers by opportunity, and I want to look at the average quote time that I've got. So on average, my quote time for each opportunity is just under 11 days. If I click a particular one, let's say I'm going to choose Litware, their average quote time 6 days. Pretty happy with that. I like what they're doing. Fusion Tomo, great name, he seemed to have an average quote time of 16 days. So there seems to be a problem here where it's taking too long for these customers to transition from an opportunity to a sale. So what I've actually got here, for those that haven't seen another product in our Power Platform, is I've actually got Power Apps in the bottom right-hand corner here. This is actually a mini Power App that exists. For those that haven't seen Power Apps before, it is a simple model-driven drag and drop interface to build a custom application. So rather than needing to know things like .NET and actually having to build and host an application, it's a very simple interface, drag and drop, where I can create things on a form and I can store data. But the great thing with the Power Platform is all the products integrate with each other. So the Power Platform is made up of Dynamics, Power Apps, Power BI, and what used to be called Flow, but now we're calling Power Automate. So now we have Power in front of all 4 of the names. So there isn't the odd child of Flow now. So the idea here is that this Power App in the bottom right-hand corner is actually tied up to Flow as well. So what I can actually do is I can add somebody into. I knew that was going to happen. I can have something in the fast track process, and I can actually. Let me just zoom in so you can see this app a little bit better. Let me try that a second time. So what you can actually do is you can, for example, add them into a fast track process. I can suggest fast track onboarding, and I can submit that item. The idea here is not only has this report actually given me the information that I could drill into, in this instance that custom application has now kicked off a flow or a process whereby an email has actually been triggered. They would have been updated in CRM as well to actually add them onto this additional program. So a workflow has been kicked off, all with the same UI. I don't need to move out to a different application and go and do something over here. I've fully integrated it in the same location. Let me just go back up to the dashboard here. And let me show one other thing as well. Let me just, always looks weird when a presenter gets out their phone, but it will make sense in like 2 seconds when I do this. And you can see my phone has appeared, and you can see pictures of my dogs. So Power BI is also available on mobile as well. So this is actually my device here, and I can see the same executive dashboard here. Apologies again, looking down at my phone, but you can see what I'm doing on screen here. And you can see the same executive dashboard is actually available here. So that was quite a wide executive dashboard that we had here. This has created a simple summary view for them to use on a mobile device. So what they can actually do is they can actually have a look through this. Again, they can click on a particular item and drill into it. If they want to, they can then actually annotate this as well and sort of, send something across to somebody, email it. So I could actually share this with somebody. I could WhatsApp it or message it to my colleague Manu, who apparently I work with too much, so it's giving me a recommendation there. But I can also mail it to somebody or save the image, whatever it is. I can do various different things. Obviously, if I'm particularly unhappy with this, I can just put lots of unhappy faces on here. But the whole point is that I can do something with it to actually achieve it. I can also, though, I could put a comment. So what this actually does is gives me the ability to put a comment on this is, why is this so bad? But I'm going to, again, annoy one of my colleagues, and I'm going to put at Manu, and I'm going to get it to send him a message. Let me just put his name in so I can actually find him. And the whole point is, my internet connectivity is being annoying, but the whole point is here that I could actually message somebody directly and I could ask them a question. The whole point here is it's going to give them a notification, it's going to send them an email, so I can actually get them to do something off of the back of this. But not only that, I don't just have to look at these high-level numbers. If I want to actually open the report itself, I can click the report button, turn my phone to the side, and I get the full Power BI product inside the mobile device as well. So I can still cross-highlight and cross-filter by clicking on a particular visual, and you can see the other visuals update. I might want to zoom in here and actually look at Tailspin Toys, and now I can see the information for Tailspin Toys. So I have the ability to fully interact. And all these interactions and capabilities are the same between the two products, between both the online and the mobile version.
Is the flow, you just mentioned about flow.
Yep.
Do it
via, when I had the Power app going into Flow, or Power Automate. Sorry, go on.
Does it work on the mobile as well?
Let's go to the sale report and show that page. Let's remember what page that was on. It was on this, so it should be on this guy. So it should work, but I'm going to do a bold thing and just see what happens, I guess. No, Siri, I don't want your help. Let me just find out what report this is actually on. It's on the Contoso Fast Track report, which means I need to find the right page for this. There's a hidden page. That's fun. I will test that. I believe it does, but I need to test it, to be 100% confident. It should work. Is the theory behind it, but let's not have me trying to find out where this hidden report is on here and just do it in a break, maybe, or just afterwards. Anyway. I actually hidden my phone whilst I was doing that amazing stuff. Anyway, okay. Any questions so far from the demo perspective? Oh, yeah, okay, go.
In terms of the Power Apps which you built inside the Power BI, thank you. Is it working on real-time data coming from a direct query, or it's an import one?
So in this particular instance, the Power App is using the same data source as Power BI. So in the case of the interaction, in fact, I should probably have shown that. Let me go to it and show you. It's import. I think is probably a shortcut answer to your thing, but let me show you kind of why. The idea is that this data is available here. You can see the icon in the top corner, the Fusion Tomo there. If I actually click on Litware, you can actually see it updates the icon because it's fully interactive. This Power App is just another visual, and the idea is when you actually build the Power App, you integrate and say it's a Power BI data source that you're pulling from. So whatever the Power BI data source is, it will be able to interact to the Power App, because what happens is it's basically taking an input from the report, from the UI, right? So when I actually built I didn't build it, when somebody built the Power App visual in the bottom corner here, they actually press Build Power App and then they press Go to Power Apps. What that does is it takes the context of the model that you had and passes it through to the form, the designer you get for Power Apps. So it knows what fields exist, all my fields that exist from Power BI and what I can use. If it had been direct query or import, it wouldn't have really mattered. In this instance, though, the answer is import.
Thank you.
That should have been a Visio diagram in the bottom corner that apparently I'm having a permissions issue with, which is really annoying because it shows like a flow through a Visio, because a Visio report's actually been put in there and it shows the quotation process that it actually flows through. So just imagine an awesome Visio diagram. That's what's in the error box right now.
Quick question. When you were commenting on the particular visual or on the sales report and asked, why is this so low? Is that a separate messaging platform, or does that integrate with Teams, for example?
So it is integrated into Power BI. It doesn't yet integrate with Teams and things like that. That is something that we are looking at, but I think it's a much wider piece. There's a couple of different ways that people kind of do the notification process at the moment. What I'll say is what I showed there is the fully integrated in Power BI version. So if I come into here, and actually go to that same visual. I didn't press store, but it doesn't really matter. If I go to open comments here, I can see the comments relevant here. So on the mobile and the Power BI, it's fully integrated between the two. The other way that some people do it is they embed these Power BI reports in a SharePoint page, and in the SharePoint page, you by default get that comment section below, right, where people can have a conversation down at the bottom, or they can move it to the side, whatever they want. It's a SharePoint page, right? They design it. In terms of the Teams integration at the moment, the way it works is it's just an additional tab that actually appears, and the way in which people would do it then is they would at that channel effectively, and they would have the conversation on the channel in Teams. So what I would say is there are kind of three mechanisms depending on how you're kind of leveraging and positioning the report to your end users. If you're using Teams, I probably wouldn't use the commenting here. I would use the commenting in the channel. If I was using SharePoint, I'd do it on the page. If I'm using Power BI as my front end, I would do it here. Does that
great. Thank you.
make sense? The integration between them all, that would be marvelous. And I believe we've got vision for it, but no commitment to that in any way.
Second more question.
No.
The button which I saw you created a while ago.
Oh yeah, the button that actually made the power up appear. That one?
Yeah, that's so. Do we need to create a different page for that, for the button to act on it, or?
No. So the what that actually did was it was using the hide functionality in Power BI. So basically, you have the ability for a visual. Let me jump ahead to a demo I've got later. So if I've got this visual in the bottom right-hand corner, imagine that's the Power App that I had there. What we've actually got is there's a selection pane item that you can choose at the very top. If I actually click it's probably called this one. If I click the little eye there, he disappears. So the bookmark, so the default state of the page was hidden, and the bookmark purely made this visible. For those that haven't seen, by the way, bookmarking is a functionality to store a state of the report. The bookmark, or the standard store of that report, was to have that visual turned off, and the bookmark purely ticked the box like I just did in the UI there to make it visible. That was all it did. In terms of when you're creating a navigation experience in Power BI, bookmarks, showing, hiding, that is the best way to do it. I don't think I've quite got time to kind of go into detail. If you've got some questions around that, happy to answer them. But that's quite a detailed, I normally do like an hour just on that. I mean, I used to run a lot of training courses when I was in services. So, I would probably spend an hour and a half just on bookmarking, navigation, all that sort of experience. It's a specific thing. There are a number of great videos that Guy in a Cube have done. So those that know Adam Saxton, Patrick LeBlanc, who run the Guy in the Cube channels, or channel. And there's also some examples when the feature first came out on the Power BI blog. Amanda Kofsky did some videos when the feature was first released. All of Amanda's and most of Adam's demos are all available on GitHub as well. So you can actually download the sample file and see exactly how they did it. So if you see every month there's a blog post, just to reiterate on the GitHub piece, every month there's a blog post saying what new features and functionality come out in Power BI. At the very bottom of that post, where Amanda does a great description of everything, right at the very bottom it will say, like in a little paragraph, this is available from GitHub, click here, and it will take you to the link of where you can download the file and play around with the feature and functionality yourself.
And my last question is, with regards to the mobile phone application which you show in the Power BI, do we need to download the Power BI app in the
Power
phone?
BI app. Yes.
The phone, yeah, okay.
Yes. So if you're in an organization that manages devices, they need to make sure that it's made available via whatever their mobile application management tool is. Obviously inside Microsoft, we use the Microsoft product, Intune, but in Microsoft, we don't kind of limit applications and things like that. We do device security on Outlook and certain things, and we allow anyone to download any product. So this is actually my personal device that I'm using, but I have access to be able to log on to corporate data because I've registered my device with Microsoft.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me go back to a few more slides and talk about it a little more.
Just a question. How can we embed the SSRS within the Power BI?
How can you embed SSRS inside Power BI was the question. I'll repeat for the recording. So the SSRS, you have the ability to publish reports to PowerBI.com. So what I haven't shown yet is with Power BI Desktop, is the Power BI desktop tool that if people haven't seen the product before, this is the tool that you use to connect to do data transformations and all the things I'll talk about in a few minutes. At the end of doing everything, you hit a publish button at the top here. For SSRS, there is a Power BI report publisher, separate tool, which you can design and build reports on. It's very much based on the old SSRS report builder tool. It's very, very similar, but it integrates some of the new functionality from Power BI as well. But you can take older SSRS reports as well, and you can publish them to PowerBI.com. When you publish them to PowerBI.com, you publish them to a workspace. And the idea is that it appears in here as an item. I probably got one in here, I expect, with it in this one, probably Colin, Liam. You can actually integrate it into here. So this one probably has one in one of these, I can't remember where it is. But the whole point is it appears in the same centralized UI. That's actually a Power App that's there. So you can actually have it appear in the same UI. Now, the one thing I'll say is you need to be on Power BI Premium to use that functionality. Yeah, that's the stipulation. Power BI Premium is a capacity-based licensing, which means that you can share reports with anyone that you like inside or outside of your organization if it's on that shared premium capacity. It's basically, there's two ways to pay for Power BI: on a per license per individual basis, called Pro, or for a capacity-based licensing, which is Premium. Any author needs Pro, any consumer either needs Pro or it needs to be hosted on Premium. That's the boring licensing thing I wasn't going to cover, but it's relevant to that piece, so I have to sort of mention it. Any more questions? Okay. How long have I had so far? 30 minutes, right? Yeah, okay. I'm on track, it's fine. Okay. Let's talk about a few more pieces as well. So let's drill a little bit more into the self-service BI. Let's talk a bit more about the unified and the enterprise BI. Bit more about the AI with some demos and things in that as well, and then about big data as well, or more advanced data. Let's start with self-service. So the idea with self-service, or the idea behind how Power BI can be self-service, is the fact that Power BI desktop tool that I showed you very, very briefly gives you the ability to connect to lots of data. You saw all those data sources on a previous screen, a previous slide that I actually showed you. But the idea is that you can pull data from one or more data sources. And that's a really important thing with Power BI. You can pull data from let's say a SQL database. You can pull data from the data lake that Dan and Jamie were showing earlier. You could pull it from an Excel file. You can pull from all of them. The whole point is you can collate data from various locations and actually then mash it up and transform it and present it together. And this gives you the ability to actually do the self-service BI. And the way we talk about it and the way I sort of position it to most customers and partners that I talk to, it's around the fact that you're going to have corporate data. That corporate data is going to be centrally managed. It's most likely going to be stored in some sort of data lake or data warehouse, depending on the appetite, the maturity, and various other things. But on top of that, it's not uncommon for you to have data that's generated by your part of the business. It might be that it exists in the CRM used by your part of the business. So in my team, for example, Dynamics, it might exist in a database for your team, but it might exist in files, or it might be files you've been given by your customers or by your partners. And the whole point is you can connect to that corporate data that's been controlled, it's got rigor in it, it's got accuracy on it, it's got master data management, you know what you're getting from it. But you can also pull in that other data and you can pull them together, pull that Excel file and join it together. And the whole point is then you can create a unified report, not only with corporate data, but with your data. And that's kind of the self-service story that I think is the most important part. Because you can just get all your own data and just create all your own reports. But then that same problem that people don't like this. I'm on recordings, I can't use the standard phrase that I would normally do, but unproliferated access to BI, I think is the normal phrase, if I excel hell, is the thing that people talk about, where you end up with loads of different files stored all over the place, multiple sources of the truth, repetition of data, all these sorts of things. So I think when we're talking about self-service BI, I don't like to promote that side of it so much. It's more about the fact that you still need that centralized data, you pull it in, and then you enrich it with other sets of data, and that's definitely the important part of the story. So the whole point is you can analyze the data. You can analyze via various different mechanisms. You can just join various data sets together as one way. You can also use functionality in Power BI, such as, and I'll come on to it later, but forecasting, quick insights. There's lots of different ways that you can analyze and get additional insights into your data. You can visualize it. Visually representing it means it's a lot more accessible. I can make something red or green to say whether it's good or bad. I can use some sort of RAG status is pretty common, red, amber, green. I can actually have lots of visualizations here that interact with each other that tell me additional data. I need to not go past that line. But not only that, once I've visualized all that data, I can publish it to other people in the organization. I can share it so everyone can see the same set of data. And again, this is an important part of the story here. If I visualize and create a great report for my departmental reporting, I want to make sure that I'm sharing it with my department and we're all looking at the same set of data. Going through this classic thing at the moment where my senior leadership team are trying to look at the success of people in my team and what we're actually working on and what we're doing. And we're trying to make sure I'm working with the senior leadership team to create that central report that everyone in our part of the business uses, to make sure that we each don't use our separate reports. Because at the moment there was a case where some of the managers use data from here, some from here, and it's, even inside Microsoft people aren't using data correctly. So those of us that do like Power BI beat them with a stick and actually help them build the reports that collate that data together. So I'm just aware of that, very much aware of that pain right now. But the idea is you publish it so it's available to everybody. In our instance, we're sharing it on Teams because that's where we have all of our conversations. We have so many Teams channels. But anyway, this particular one, we actually have our reporting and everything on, which is a great place so everyone knows where to go to look at kind of what we're actually doing as a team and as a department. And then that gives you the ability to collaborate. As I said, I'm a huge advocate of Teams myself, so obviously we're collaborating and talking on the chat inside the channel. That is the way that we do it. That's kind of our preferred way, but there's different ways in which your business works, or you may be using other tools, so various different ways that you can collaborate. In terms of getting to the data, as I said, data's from lots and lots of different locations. You can shape and transform, cleanse the data. You can importantly, somebody briefly mentioned it already, you can connect live or you can import the data. Just to briefly expand upon that, the idea with Power BI is you can pull data from lots of sources and have a cache in memory and schedule a refresh to occur on a regular basis. Depending on your licensing model, anywhere from basically every 30 minutes to maybe only 8 times per day. There's various different reasons why that can happen. The other option is you connect live. Live means or direct or live query, and there is an important distinction between those two terms. The idea with connecting live is that you always have the most up-to-date version of that data, right? So you're connecting to it. I interact with my visual. I almost said pie chart, and I almost hit myself. A bar chart on the left and a scorecard on the right. When I click on my bar chart or my map or whatever it is, it will actually cross-filter and cross-highlight my other areas. But importantly, it will go down to the data source. Let's say it's a SQL database. It'll execute a SQL query and return it back to Power BI, which means you always get the most up-to-date data. There's 2 massive benefits for it. 1, you get the most up-to-date live data. 2, you have no limitations in terms of the size of data that you can use with Power BI. I could have a quarter of a petabyte's worth of data. If you've ever seen Christian Wade's demo, where the draggy droppy clicky, I can't remember what his phrase is now. It's very silly. Anyway, there's a demo whereby he does a quarter of a petabyte of data that's connecting live query. And so you have the ability to connect to that sort of volume of data. The downside, You need a data source that is capable of you querying a quarter of a petabyte of data in a sensible amount of time. His demo looks fantastic. What he doesn't tell you is there's a 50-node HD Insight cluster that's costing like £1,000 an hour to actually achieve that. But the point is, it is possible, and if you need that to run your business, it is perfectly doable. Prep your data using familiar Power Query experience. Never used to like that phrase at the start. I'm a big fan now because Power Query is now the way in which you transform data in Power BI, or Excel, or analysis services, or Data Factory, or basically anything else we're bringing out now is using the Power Query interface. So the reason I really like this is the fact that when you start to use other products, you get a familiar interface and a familiar transformation on the various products in our stack, which is really beneficial. The idea with the Power Query interface is it's relatively simple, and I'll show it in a demo later. It's relatively simple for you to actually remove and hide columns and filter rows out, and even unpivot and pivot the data and all those sorts of things, whatever you might want to do. Transform data from JSON into a flat file, whatever it may be. And on top of that is you can extend the self-service prep with things like data lake storage and other data services. I think it's important to say it is possible to do all the data transformation in Power BI. Possible and a good idea are not necessarily always the same thing. With a small set of data or when you're trialing and testing things out, Power BI is great. When you've got a terabyte's worth of data that you're trying to do data transformation, that's clearly where our other Azure services like Data Factory that was demoed earlier, or using Databricks, Azure Synapse, some of the other technologies, let's say, that was mentioned by Dan earlier, those are when those make a lot more sense. Is everyone on board? Everyone happy with where we are? Okay.
Just a question.
I'll repeat the question for the mic, it's fine.
Sure. We have
I'll repeat.
old SAP ECC 4.6.
Yeah.
There's no connector available. So in that case, how we can extract the data from sources?
What, from SAP?
It's SAP ECC 4, which is pre-2000.
You're going to need to have something that can either push the data out, or you're going to have to create a custom interface. So you're going to have to create a custom connector. But I don't think there's any end point. I mean, there's got to be some way of extracting the data out from there. So I haven't worked with that older version of SAP, I'm perfectly honest with you, but there may well be a way to automate an extract of the data. I'll be honest, most times I've worked with SAP stuff, that is what we've ended up doing, is create an automated extract from SAP side to land it into, I'm going to go into data services for a second here, to land it into data lake store or blob storage, to then have an Azure function watching for the data actually appearing, to then actually push some transformation out to another process.
I wish it's that simple, but
I know, I've oversimplified it, of course I have.
any tool which is able to connect to the SAP ECC 4.6 is not able to connect to Azure?
Yeah, so what you want to do is you want to output it to a file system of some description, and then you could use Azure File Sync, for example, to actually have it in the blob storage like Dan mentioned earlier. Once it's there inside the storage, you can use the other Azure technologies like Data Factory to connect to it and things like that. If it's a case of it can't write to those locations, you definitely have to write to either an on-premises location and then use a gateway to connect to it directly, or more preferably is sync that location up to an Azure service. In terms of analyzing, the model that you can actually create a model with Power BI. It's rather ambitiously states create model automatically. So if I connected to an Azure SQL database, for example, and I had primary key, foreign key relationships and all those sorts of things, it would build it for me magically, and it would look as pretty as that as it does on the screen. If I have Excel files and things like that, it will use column names that match between the two. And again, as long as I've named things beautifully, it will create it automatically for me. In reality, it's quite an easy drag and drop interface to tell it what the relationships are. I've got two tables here, I drag one column over the other column, there's the relationship. So, I'm belittling a little bit the automatic that it states, but the manual intervention you need to do is quite minimal as well in terms of creating that model. There's lots of ways that you can create measures and additional analysis on top of it. One of the great things that it's got in there, though, is the ability to create quick measures. So those of you that have created measures, this is basically creating like a calculation or something, so it's the sum of a column, or maybe a conditional sum. But the ability of a quick measure is not needing to necessarily learn that DAX technology, that DAX language. The quick measure is a user drag and drop interface to say, I want to do a sum of something and for the same period last year. And you choose a few drop downs and it writes that DAX for you. In fact, one of the examples of quick measure actually writes you like 15 lines of DAX. And it's a very interesting way for you to maybe do a bit of speed learning of DAX as well. On top of that, it has the ability to do things like clustering and binning. So you can right-click a column and create a cluster, and effectively you can group things together. You know, it might well be I want to create a custom grouping of certain countries or of certain people or something like that to create a team or an area or something. And I can actually easily do that with a few clicks. In terms of binning, this is the ability of, I've got sales between 1 and 1 billion. Maybe I want to box these into groups of 100,000 or groups of 1 million or whatever it may be. And with a couple of clicks, I can just say I want to bin it via a certain number of splits. I might want to just split something into 20, or I might want to split it by every million or something like that. And again, that binning functionality, very much like the grouping, it's just the same. Binning and clustering are pretty much the same thing. Binning's on a number, clusters on a category. There's the only real difference between the two functionalities. And in terms of beyond the quick measures is the ability to use DAX measures, actually build those measures yourself and actually create them. And I'll show you an example. In terms of the visualization, there are lots of visuals. Limitless is funny, but there are 20-something visuals out of the box that we actually have, but there are hundreds of custom visuals available on our marketplace. Lots and lots of our partners actually build these for us. We actually have some passionate people. I've got one on the next slide of people that just love to build interesting visuals, but there's loads of different ways that you can visualize your data. If none exist today, you can build your own. We have an open API that you have the ability to create any visual that you like. An example of one of the more weird and wonderful ones you might have seen is for Rolls-Royce, for their engines. They've basically taken a jet engine, they've basically sliced the quarter off of it, and they have a whole visual built around that. So there's some quite fancy visuals that you can actually build as well. And the idea is that all visuals interact with each other automatically, but that bottom point is a very small point that's really important, but bookmarks and custom navigation are the best way to kind of bring that story to life, actually tell something with the report itself. So having that high-level summary that I can click on that sale item to go into the next level of detail, to then right-click and drill to the next level, to be able to navigate throughout with things like bookmarks and drilling is really important to create a very good report. Some of the custom visuals examples here. The timeline storyteller in the top left visual is a very interesting one. My absolute favorite is the Align-to aquarium in the bottom left-hand corner. If the numbers are negative, the fish turns upside down and dies, by the way, and floats to the top. Fantastic visual. I might have to demo it to you later. And then you've got things like KPIs and gauges and things like that. And for those people who really liked the map that you could do in Excel back in the day, somebody was passionate enough to rebuild it for Power BI, if you really like that Excel 3D Bing map thing that I don't like. But anyway, it's there. So the idea is then that you can share with other people. So this is where we actually have a couple of choices. Generally, when you hear people talk about Power BI, you hear them talking about Power BI service, you hear them talking about the cloud. So the idea is you have the Power BI desktop tool like I showed you, you then publish it to the cloud version. But for some of your customers, government being a relevant one for certain scenarios, you might want that data to stay on premises. You might not want to push it into the cloud. In which case we have a Power BI report server or Power BI on premises. And this is the ability to have an instance of Power BI behind your firewall, effectively installed on your hardware. And the idea is that you can publish those same Power BI reports, authored with a different version of Power BI Desktop, as a slight disclaimer, but same Power BI reports that you can publish to an on-premises version of Power BI. It doesn't have all of the functionality. There are some slight limitations. It doesn't have dashboard, and you can't do real-time reporting. But the whole point is it doesn't have quick insights built in. There's a few limits in terms of what it can do, because it doesn't have the power of the cloud behind it to make it possible. But it is most of the functionality of Power BI, including the integration between Power BI and paginated reports or SQL Server reporting services. For those people that have used SQL Server reporting services, Power BI Report Server is just a reskin of that. It basically is a reskin with Power BI pulled into it. It's, if you change that yellow banner to a red, you'll be like, oh, right, yeah, okay, it's just SQL. Beyond that, you have the ability to schedule automatic refreshes. As I said before, you can schedule refreshes to happen every 30 minutes, or if you've got Power BI Pro, you can do 8 times per day. Or if you want to, you can automate this refresh process. You can call via the API, you can tell it to refresh after your ETL's finished. So let's say you've got a daily batch job that refreshes your data. At the end of it, you can say, now I'll go and refresh my Power BI report. So you can do things like that as well. Big thing that's overlooked, package your reports into apps for easy consumption and control. This is the ability for you to collate multiple dashboards and reports to one centralized location. But it goes beyond that now. We've really enhanced apps beyond that. You have the ability to create that navigation experience that you saw really briefly on my screen when I went into that Power BI demo from Liam, where it actually showed a navigation experience, and I clicked on a few different reports down the left looking for the right thing. Probably should have searched at the top. But the idea is that you can create lots of different objects in that same collation of app. But it's not just Power BI reports. It's not just paginated reports. It's videos. It could be training videos. It's documentation. It's the fact that you can have many different options and many different integration of many different products into that same app. In fact, the functionality that we're bringing in, I don't think we've done it yet, although we announced it at Ignite, is the ability to have things like Microsoft Forms in there. So you can have a feedback form for the app, for functionality that people want, all in that app. So all in that app could be the Power BI report, the paginated report, a form for feedback, a video for training, a documentation for the information about the metrics and the data that's used and how it's been built and where the data comes from, all in that same place in that centralized app. We've already mentioned this a few times. Pixel Perfect Paginated Reports, that's the new name for SQL Server Reporting Services, or RDL reports. These are, rather than having the fully interactive functionality that you've got in Power BI, there's still definitely a place for form or perfect, Pixel Perfect reports to exist.
Sorry, this is with reference to the earlier slide. You mentioned about package your reports in apps.
Into apps, yes. They're called Power BI, they're called apps, yes.
Does that mean that you can have a version control as well? Or?
No, version control is something that we are working on as a story actively. The current story for version controlling is the fact that you would control the Power BI desktop file and that you would use PowerShell to automate the deployment via the API. That's the kind of the versioning story, and that is a 30-second thing. If you specifically want to talk about versioning, I'd say come and talk to me afterwards because I want to tell you a little bit more than that. Because it's again, that's a bigger story and a harder conversation. We're actively working on that though, publicly talking about it, and we're going to make the version controlling stuff way better. The versioning that it does give you with apps, by the way, is it gives you the ability to stage. I have the ability to change reports and everything, and when I'm ready to publish, I hit the publish button. So it's not a version control, but it is a staging. So it's kind of half control, like not quite. Yeah. So collaboration. So you have the ability to have a look at the data on any device. You already showed that. I already showed you that you can access it on the mobile, but you can access it on any tablet, any mobile, any device. You can use Q&A to automatically ask questions, so that questions and answers that you can ask. That was the part of the demo that when I was clicking somewhere and I'd forgotten what to show, so I'm going to jump out and quickly show it, thinking about it. Because I meant to show you previously, in the exact dashboard I've got here, I can go into my sales. And I have this question at the top here, this ask questions about your data. And I have the ability to ask a question. I mean, I can put the full sentence in there, show me sales by country, for example, and it'll just show me the report that I'm doing here as a map. I've not done anything in advance to kind of make this work. I knew the name of that column was called sales. Like that's the magic that I knew. But beyond that, if I'd used something that hadn't been there, I'd have still been able to fix it. But the whole point is I can build something like this and actually have a look at it. In fact, if I use something, show me revenue. Oh, revenue by country. This time it didn't know what revenue was. So it's actually highlighted it in red underneath. So I can actually click on it and I can tell it what I wanted. Last year's revenue by country was the thing I wanted. So even when it doesn't answer my question because I've not used the right word, it underlines it in red and gives you the ability to do that. But not only that, the fact that that's highlighted in red was actually saved. We knew that that was wrong. which means that the author of that report can go and look at the questions that have been asked, look at the failures that have happened, and they can define something or map something to that word revenue. So we've actually given you the ability for the author to now fix that. They'll know that I keep asking revenue there. They will be able to go in and actually say revenue means whatever, and actually actively tell it. Next time somebody asks, revenue will be a keyword and it'll work. So it's fully interactive. Okay. That's the ability to do Q&A. You can also integrate these into Teams and SharePoint, as I've mentioned a few times already. If you haven't realized, I'm a huge fan of doing that. You can also connect to live data inside Excel as well. So what I've actually been showing so far is the ability for you to connect to data that's directly from Power BI. Power BI actually has a functionality called Analyze in Excel. This is the ability to connect to that same Power BI desktop model, that same Power BI model, that same solution that I'm using in Power BI with Excel, which means that I can use a pivot table or a chart, whatever I like. I can use Excel as my front end to access that same model. I don't need to have a completely different model just because my end users want to use Excel. And nothing underpins that quite like we do in Microsoft, whereby every report that we create officially for our sales teams, for our engineering teams, for our finance, every single report has two versions. It has one model and an Excel front end and a Power BI front end. Every single one of them, which means that, let's be honest, most of the finance people are doing it, but they'll use Excel and not Power BI as their front end of choice. But it doesn't matter because it's the same model, has the same version control, the management and everything that exists behind it, and the front end is just the end user's choice.
Does that affect licenses at all?
No.
It doesn't reduce licenses?
No. The end user still needs to have the same license. So either the model needs to be deployed into a premium workspace, in which case licensing is not really relevant anyway, in terms of anyone can access it, or I need a pro license to either use Excel or Power BI. The fact that I'm accessing that live model is the same point. All right. That was the same slide with 4 different images in it. I don't know why. So you have the ability to connect to data on the go as well. So you can connect with the Power BI mobile app. Something that was not shown because that went really quickly. If you look at the image of the Power BI mobile, you can see that you can annotate as I did previously, but you also have the Q&A functionality, which I didn't demo. The same ability to ask those natural language questions exists in the mobile app as well as in the web client as well. And so another big part of the story, and when talking about Power BI, is the fact that it integrates with a lot of the other products that we have in our platform as well. In terms of Excel, I've already mentioned, you have the ability to either connect to and pull data into Excel, or you have the ability to use that Analyze in Excel to access that same Power BI model. But not only that, if you've created solutions in Excel, you can publish from Excel into Power BI and have Excel sheets in a Power BI front end, published into an app. So I could have Excel, I could have PowerPoint, I could have everything in that same place. Visio. Visio exists as a visual. It's a visualization type, and I can have a Visio flow, and I can tie it up to a Power BI report, and I can actually show the flow through. My demo would have showed that if that had actually, apparently I'd had the right access to that Visio file. SharePoint, you can embed it into a SharePoint site, you can embed it into a Teams channel, you can use Power Apps, which I already showed here, you can pull data from Dynamics 365, you can embed Power BI reports back into Dynamics 365. Doesn't matter whether you're using F&O or whether you're finance and operations or navigation or CRM, it integrates fully with all the versions of Dynamics 365. The added benefit, if you're using the Finance and Operations Dynamics 365, is that it can be fully interactive. I could click a visual in the Power BI report embedded in Dynamics F&O, and it could do something in Finance and Operations. It could open a Finance and Operations page, it could open the customer page, it could open the sale page, whatever it may be. There's actually a full two-way communication that you can develop into a Finance and Operations with Power BI combination. And it also integrates with a lot of our other SaaS applications as well, when it is a SaaS app in itself. How are we doing? Cool. So, unified self-service and enterprise BI. So, important part of this story is the fact that it's an integration of multiple tools, all inside the same Power BI product. It has security, compliance, and privacy. So from an integration of the tool perspective, it is SQL Server Analysis Services behind the scenes. So those that have ever worked with SQL Server Analysis Services tabular models, that is the technology that's used behind Power BI. Those that have launched Power BI Desktop that haven't seen before, it actually spins up analysis services behind the scenes, so much so that I can use SQL Server Management Studio that Dan was using earlier and connect to that model if I wanted to. You know, it's read-only because of the way it's set up, but I can still access it, which means that I can use tools to actually debug and actually run performance analysis. So I can connect Profiler to it. I can actually run traces on it. The whole point is all the rich functionality and support that we have for analysis services exists for Power BI as well, and that's the important part of the story. So it means those enterprise developers that are used to using analysis services tabular can do all the same things with Power BI. Beyond that, there's a limitation in Power BI that exists today, unless we release the feature that I haven't checked on yet, that you can have a limit of 1 gig's worth of data inside Power BI as the maximum model size for an imported model. That is going up to 400 gig to match Azure Analysis Services to really make sure it's the same product between the two, because behind the scenes, inside the service, is Azure Analysis Services. And so you will be able to have 400 gig. We announced that earlier in the year. We announced it again Ignite. But beyond that, we're also increasing it to 2 terabytes we're going to allow as an imported model, which is huge. So in terms of the scalability, that story will become even better in terms of the integration between analysis services and Power BI in the coming months. We are looking to turn the increased 400 gig model on very soon. I just don't have the date right this second, and I forgot to check it. But as I mentioned a couple of times as well, we also integrate SQL Server reporting services as well. So this is the traditional tool that a lot of people have been using to create their enterprise reports. And we don't want them to have to redesign everything in Power BI. We want them to be able to lift and shift it into Power BI, create new reports, and over time transition, but still to leverage those existing reports they've invested in today. You know, the fact that they've spent months and they've been running for years actually developing these solutions, we don't want to say throw away and redesign in Power BI. This is why we brought it in to be part of the Power BI product, to make sure people can leverage the existing investments they've made in that area. From a security perspective, all security is integrated in terms of how people access is via Azure Active Directory. So for those that don't know, behind the scenes, Azure has Azure Active Directory. It is basically like Active Directory on premises. It's basically your identity to log in. I'm sure all of you here with laptops are logging into it, and that will be your identity that you're using. With the Azure identity, this will be the same login that you use for the rest of the Office 365 suite. So those of you using Outlook and Excel and all the other products and OneDrive, it's all the same login that's centralized throughout. And you have the ability to manage and control that as well. From a compliance perspective, there are lots of different compliances that we actually adhere to, that were actually tested by third-party organizations to actually make sure we adhere to them. And you can see that there are some global, some that are local government or UK, for example, UKG Cloud, but you've also got some industry or regional compliances as well. And then from a data privacy perspective, the whole point is that you can control access to who you want to be able to see your data. When you publish a Power BI report, you have the ability to control who can see it. So I publish it, which means I can see it. I publish it to a workspace with others in it, now they can see it. But maybe I only want them to see a certain amount of the data. I can implement row-level security, which means that I can share a same report with everyone in the organization, but I can give individual or even departmental access to say you can only see this subset of data. An example of how we work inside Microsoft is we have a large model. It's in analysis service, it doesn't really matter. Like I say, it translates between the two. But by default, I can only see the data for the UK because I reside in the UK. There is a request mechanism to say I want access to some data in X or Y, and there's an approval mechanism that means I can get access to it. But the whole point is each person inside their own area of the business can only see their data. In fact, by default, I could only see the UK partner data in the UK until I asked for the wider UK, and I gave a business justification, and I got access. But this works just as well if HR data. It could be one HR report, but it actually gives you your information individually when you look at it. When your manager looks at it, it gives them their information plus everyone who's underneath them. And you can set up all of that security inside Power BI with row-level security. In terms of the privacy and access from a wider standpoint, in terms of your tenant that exists, your Office 365 tenant that the data resides in is actually ring-fenced, and only your people inside your Active Directory, people inside your organization can see and access that data. There's nobody else, there's no cross access between the different companies unless you explicitly grant somebody access. Just to dig into that a little bit more and tell you how that actually works. If, for example, I was working with Dan and I wanted to share him a report for my data exists in Microsoft, I can send him an invitation to his Grey Matter account. The way it will work is it will invite him as a guest user into my Active Directory, and then he'll be able to access it. So it's not even his user over here. A copy of his user is created inside my Active Directory that's synced with his real one. And the whole point is it's still only being accessed inside the tenant, because that's where his user really exists. And I can dig a little bit more if there are more questions from a security perspective, especially with regards to B2B and things like that, business to business or Azure AD. I'm happy to talk about it, but this is a boring bit of the presentation, so I'm just going to go next. Right, AI.
Just a question, the data flows within the Power BI and
Yeah.
the Data Factory are the same?
No. Okay, the question was, are data flows in Power BI and Data Factory the same? No. They both decided to release products within a few weeks of each other, and our process for going through naming conventions is quite long. They didn't talk to each other, so one of them has a space in between data and flows, and one of them doesn't. And no, I don't remember which is which. No, data flows in Power BI and data flows in Data Factory are different. Data flows in Power BI is the ability to do the data transformation inside the Power BI service without needing to use Power BI Desktop. The idea is that you can build not a model, but you can build what we call entities, which are basically tables for all intensive purposes. So you could create a single source of truth, or you could call it master data management for, let's say, customer. So you could create a data flow that has your customer entity in it, and you define it as a customer entity. Inside, and you can do data transformations inside that to make it accessible for the end user. With Data Factory, the transformations are, let's say, you can do a lot more in terms of its transformation. It's a lot more scalable in terms of the fact that it's actually backed by Databricks. So you specify the number of clusters that you actually want, the size of the clusters and things like that. So you can do a lot more in terms of the transformations and the sizes and things like that. So if you're trying to do self-service BI, Data Flows is perfect for that. I would say Data Factory's data flows are somewhere between corporate BI and an experienced data engineer doing BI, I think. I wouldn't quite put it in the camp of a self-service person using data flows in Data Factory, because I still think there's that little step too far. As Dan did show, that some of those transformations and things that you do, you kind of write little snippets of code that you kind of put into it, which are sometimes a bit much to expect of a business type user. Whereas a data flow, I would expect a business user or any user, once they understand why it exists, would be able to do it. And for a business user, it makes sense if they, for example, have a single definition of whatever it is, customer or sale, for their team or department or something like that, and they publish it up, and that's where it makes sense.
So one more question.
Yeah.
Few of the developers which I work normally, I'd put Azure Analysis Services there with Power BI. But they're asking exactly same functionality exists in those. Like why we need Azure Analysis Services?
Okay. Why do we need Azure Analysis Services with Power BI is the question. A shortening of the question. In honesty, once we increase the size of the model to be 400 gig, you could argue you don't need Azure Analysis Services. The reason being, it will have not only all of the functionality analysis services, almost all, and there's some very specific stuff, but there's actually some functionality that exists in Power BI that doesn't exist in analysis services. For example, automatic partition management exists in Power BI, and for anyone who's ever done that in analysis services, know that's like over 1,000 lines of code that you need to write to basically say, I've got a partition that's a different partition for every day, and then at the end of the month I roll up into a month, and at the end of the year I roll all those up into a year. And it's basically, there's a whole good reason you do it from performance perspective and how data's queried and things like that. You have to build all that manually in analysis services. It does it out the box in Power BI. If you use I've forgotten the name of the functionality now. If you use the functionality whereby you can do the partial refresh, it has a specific name, mind blank. But you can thank you, incremental refresh. If you use that, then it automatically does the partition management for you. Now, there is still a use case for it. I'm not blanket saying you're never going to use your analysis services. I would say a lot of people would argue, why would I use it? Because if I've got all the functionality and the model in, I would most likely go with Power BI Premium. Now, Power BI Premium is premium functionality. It has paginated reports in it. It has AI in it. It has data flows in it. It has the larger data models. It has various pieces of functionality that exist inside it. Analysis services has the larger models, and therefore, there's obviously a disparity in price. Power BI Premium is more expensive than analysis services because Power BI Premium is analysis services plus a bunch of other stuff. If you're going to use the other functionality, it makes almost no sense to use Azure Analysis Services, and you'd stick with Power BI Premium. If you're not using any of the functionality and you purely need a larger model, Azure Analysis Services, I would say, clearly has a place. And that's, I think, largely, and now we need to see how it plays out, right? Because only so far we've announced this functionality and people aren't using it in anger, and creating the larger models. There are some people that have done it in preview. So we need to see how it plays out. But this is the general messaging that we're getting from the people from those development teams, basically, and that's the way it's looking. It's more going to be, and it's a horrible decision point, but a cost decision rather than anything else. Although we like to frame it as a functionality difference between the two, is a more positive spin on the exact same message. All right. Okay, pervasive AI in BI. Great. AI and BI, let's just keep it simple. Right, so the benefits are it gives, obviously, business users the ability to understand their data further. It helps them with data preparation. And it also, most importantly, for me, the bottom one, is gives the ability for data scientists to collaborate with business users. And data people, doesn't matter what the word after data is, collaborating with business users is always the best thing to happen and always one of the most challenging pieces to happen. So how does this help business users? So there's three pieces of functionality that exist. First one's Q&A, which you've already seen. This is the ability to ask that natural language question. Show me the number of sales by country, and it gives you an answer. That's one way. That is a form of AI, not one that the end users need to do, but there is a form of AI that's working behind the scenes to make that possible. The second one is called Quick Insights. The little screen in the middle, by the way, is changing for those that haven't seen. This will randomly update. So this one's Quick Insights here. This is the results of the Quick Insights that you can see on screen there. The idea is you run Quick Insights against a model. So you build a model in Power BI and you say, show me the Quick Insights. What it'll actually do is it'll spend between 30 seconds, 2 minutes, somewhere in that period. It'll actually analyze the data. What it'll do is it will look for time series information. It will look for trends. It will look for correlations. It will look for groupings of data. It will look for outliers in your data. There's a few different metrics that we use. There's a few different points that we're looking for. And the whole point is it will tell you that information about your data without you needing to do anything. We basically analyze it and say, there's an outlier here whereby you have more sales in June 2019. For example, or it will say most of your sales are happening in the US or something like that. The latter might be an obvious thing, but it might not necessarily be something. It might be much more meaningful is the majority of your sales margin are in these nails. Might be a random place of interesting piece of insight. It doesn't differentiate between it's in the US or it's a nail, but the whole point is the technology works the same way. So Quick Insights is a great way to analyze your data and actually have a look at what you don't necessarily know about your data. But beyond that, you have the ability to run Quick Insights on an individual dashboard tile. So you can say, I'm looking at this dashboard tile, which is showing me customers, salesperson, and sales, and I want you to tell me Quick Insights for that. What it will do is it will look at that set of data and the set of data touching it and saying, right, I'm going to tell you more targeted insights for that particular area. Use exactly the same algorithm, same method, but what it's doing is it's limiting it from the entire model to the subset that you've told it to look at. Very good piece of just a great feature, to be perfectly honest with you. I would say if you're ever going to build something, just test it and see what it can tell you about your data. A lot of people then ask the question, how do I take what that's doing and all the logic and build something? You basically use all those services that Jamie was talking about earlier, and you build it yourself. We don't expose this, the functionality of how this actually works. But effectively, we're using most of those cognitive services, like pretty much all of them, to actually do this sort of stuff. And then the last one is the key drivers. Key drivers are the ability for you to have a look at, there's a demo of this actually in a second, to actually have a look at what the most important triggers or categories are for a particular item. So for example, if I'm looking at my total sales and I drag in salesperson, country, let's say year, what it will do is it will look across those different categories and say, what's the most influencing factor? What has the largest impact upon this number changing? And so the whole point is, if you're trying to, it's basically correlation, right? So if you're looking at your data and you're seeing an increase or a decrease in something, you can pull all the categories that you think are influencing it, and it will tell you in order ranking which one is influencing it most. I think there's a little video-y thing that will show in a second. That I thought was right there, but apparently, it's in a few slides. Right, this is the Q&A functionality, which you've already seen, which isn't going to work to zoom in on that, but this is the ability for you to basically ask the natural language questions here, and it actually creates the visualization for you, as you can see, and then you can do things like, say, in a map and things like that, and actually change the visualization and how it's represented. For quick insights, there's two things that you can do with quick insights. Ignore that video for a second. Quick insights, I mentioned, as I said, it looks at your data. Actually, let me show you this quick insights functionality, because this one will demo a lot better than it will explain. Let me go back to this executive dashboard report. And let me look at for sales, will probably make sense. Okay, great. And that should be time. Excellent. Okay, cool. In this bottom left-hand visualization here, let me expand the visual actually to make it a little bit bigger so we can all see it here. In this, we can see the opportunity value by account. So I've got all the accounts listed down the side: Southridge Video, Tailspin Toys, etc. And I can see where they are basically those top two biggest accounts. What I can do is I can right-click Southridge and I can say Analyze and find where the distribution is different. What this is going to do is it's going to look at the opportunity by value, and in this instance, those two accounts are the most important, but it's going to show me when those two accounts are not the largest. Because just looking at the data overall doesn't necessarily tell you the story. That might be an outlier in that loads of sales happened on a particular month, or one particular deal happened, or something along those lines. So information like this, in Asia Pacific, Fourth Coffee is actually by far the largest account in that particular area here, because what it's done is it said, right, why don't you try and filter by region and actually see how that impacts it. So if I choose Europe here, along the top, it's AdventureWorks and the phone company that are actually the biggest. And it's not only done that for just the region. If you scroll down, it's actually done it for a number of different ways. So that was the biggest account, but when you look at all the data, but when you slice it by all these different mechanisms, it's not. So in Q3, it's City Power and Light. They're actually the largest. In Q4, let's have a look who Q4 is. In Q4, it is those two. So it looks like Q4 is, in fact, there were even more or even larger percentage inside Q4. And inside Q2, they had no sales at all. So in fact, this is a perfect example showing you that that quarter, Q4, was the outlier in that they had a huge amount of sales in Q4. And in fact, if I look at ProSwear, they've actually got 30 million in sales in Q2. And there are no sales for those top two biggest customers. So this is where you can find the distribution is different. Basically, however your report is filtered in this way, tell you how it's slightly different. That's one. This is another form of quick insights, by the way. There was the first quick insights where you run across all your data. Second one where you run for a specific set of your data. This is where I'm specifically saying, show me where this is not true, basically. Show me a different version of the truth here. And then the last one is watch this bottom right visual here, where I've got the last 12 months estimated revenue and the number of opportunities. What I've actually got here is I've got a huge spike here. All right. So I've got a huge spike in, let me hover over to find the month, in October. So between September and October, I've got a large spike. So let me right click and analyze and I want it to tell me why. I want it to explain the increase. If it had gone down, by the way, it would explain the decrease. So it's a pretty cool interactive button as it stands. But the cool thing says that, okay, so it's gone up by 366.67%. Let's try and tell you why. It's because in progress accounts for the majority of the increase. So it looks like things moved to in progress is the reason that that's actually jumped up. What else is it actually telling me? The open account accounted for the majority of the among status, offsetting the decrease of 1. So it's actually 28 new customers that have actually happened here that it's telling me. What else can I see? 7 and 6 accounted for the majority of the increase among the pipeline phase numbers. It's probably not a particularly useful insight. It moved pipeline phase, again, kind of obvious. Let's have a look. Europe, there were 11. Asia Pacific, there were 8. And North America, there were 4. In fact, we had 1 less deal in South America. So there's quite a lot of insights this is telling me to give me some justification, some explanation as to why I've had this change, which is obviously the next level of action that you can actually take. I think the action is probably more likely if there's a decrease, but maybe it's just as you want to reward somebody for an increase. I don't know. So does that all make sense in terms of functionality? All right, cool. Okay, so that's the find where the distribution is different, and then explain the increase and decrease is that one there, which I've just demoed there. So key influences, this is an interesting one here, and let's see if I can actually zoom in. I'm guessing it's not going to work on the thing. That was worth a try. All right, so the way in which it works is, and if you can just about see on the visual here, there's actually a new visual called a key influencers visual. And so this key influencers here, somebody's actually dragged in the number of customers that they've actually got here, and the customer reason. What influences the customer in returning? And then they've dragged here the primary interest, so they can see what that actually means, but they're also dragging in the purchased spa voucher, the recreation type, and the country. And it's actually telling you that people being in the UK is the largest influencer for people returning. The second most important is people from Japan. And so it's going through and actually analysing and telling you of all those factors you've dragged in, this is not only the most important one, but this is the selection inside this category that has influenced it most. That's the new key influencers visual that exists in there. Any questions about that? Does that all make sense? Okay. More. There are still more AI features that exist inside Power BI. You have the ability to do automatic clustering. So if you have a scatter chart, you have the ability to have a look at all of the data inside there, and it will try and categorize and create clusters for you. So if you've got a scatter plot, it'll actually say you've got these groups of people or these groups of products that you can categorize together. You can use it for forecasting, you can use it integration with cognitive services, and you can also integrate with our automated machine learning as well. I'm not going to make the same mistake here this time, and I'm going to go into each of these first. So forecasting, this is where on a line chart, for example, that you can see on here, somebody's actually hit the button at the far here saying analysis, and they've actually added a forecast line and saying forecast the next 10 points. Don't link that. And so it's actually giving me the next 10 points on my forecast here. Basically, it's using linear regression to do this. It's basically doing a form of machine learning, but out the box. Someone did it with literally 3 clicks, and it's forecasting their data. As I'm sure most of you know with data, it's only as good as the data that's actually supplied to it. If you've got garbage in, you're going to get a garbage forecast. So it's Just be aware of that. Not only that, we also have the integration of cognitive services as well. So you can do things like sentiment analysis and key phase extraction, effectively things similar to what Jamie's done, but via a user interface. So in this instance, somebody's opened a data flow, as gentleman mentioned earlier, and here you have the ability to have a look at the data. So there is a field here for the reason text, and you have the ability to hit the AI Insights button at the top. You can choose the cognitive service that you want to use, and in this instance, I think they're going to choose the sentiment, score sentiment that they're choosing. They're telling it to score that particular field, and they're scoring it and invoking it with English as the type. And what it's done is just added a sentiment score here at the end. So with a few clicks, they've basically used the cognitive services that I've mentioned here and integrated it into a Power BI report. Now, that's great. That's really useful in terms of, I think they're doing a second one here. They're using the key phrase extraction now to basically do the same sort of thing. And they're hitting the key phrase, and it's pulled out the key phrases from that same text. So they're using the same bits of AI. Now, this is great. So this has given us the ability to analyze and use this in this particular solution, in this data flow. But you've got to think the benefit of doing it in the way that Jamie's done it is the fact that you can then use that for everyone in the organization. This is a bespoke solution that you've created here that you've made relevant for that set of reports. And if that's the scope that you're going to, Power BI is perfect for that. If you're trying to take your corporate data and do the same sort of analysis and make it accessible by everyone in the business, this is where you would use the cognitive services and actually store the data and using the processes that Jamie and Dan effectively showed. Does that make sense? So I think whilst I love all this AI functionality going into Power BI, I don't want to detract from the fact that there is definitely value in doing it centrally. And this is the difference between a self-service type solution and a corporate solution between the two. So this is definitely the self-service scenario. Not only that, but we have the ability to do cognitive services as well. So, not this one, sorry, automated ML as well. So what we didn't show as part of the demos is, as well as all those cognitive services that are built out of the box, you have the ability in the Azure Machine Learning service, so our web version of Azure Machine Learning, to actually create your own models. These can be via an interface, using the studio and actually doing a drag and drop and creating your models. And it could actually be with code. You could code something in Python, or you could actually have a Databricks cluster, whatever it is. You've basically, a data scientist has built some machine learning. I think it's enough to kind of understand from that perspective. The whole point is then they can expose that model as a machine learning service like this, so they have the ability to consume it in the same way as a cognitive service. So you can think of it of a cognitive service designed for your organization, where it's taken in your specific business requirements, it's using your data, it's trained from your data, it's bespoke for you. And the whole point with Power BI is, in terms of the interface and you actually choosing it, it was just a click above the cognitive services. It was literally the drop down above it. The way in which you use it is identical. So as long as you make people aware of its availability, what it can do and when they should use it, they could use it just like a cognitive service. Not only that, I'm not done. There's still more integration with AI. If you've got data scientists or users that can actually build or write R or Python scripts, you have the ability to actually execute them inside Power BI directly. So inside Power BI, if I just go to this, that's the ML one, this one. Here, you have the ability to add a visual of type Python, or even R, either. You add the fields that you're interested to in the values here. You paste your code down here inside the Python window that you've got, or the script window down here. You hit execute, and it renders your visual there. So the whole point is you can use R or Python code to actually just write or prepare the visual you want to, and you can still return it and use it. There are some limitations in terms of the exact libraries that you can use that we actually support. So there are thousands of libraries across R and Python. We support a subset which are available in our documentation. You can see which ones. But the whole point is we support most of the most popular ones, especially from a visualization perspective, in terms of being able to plot correlations, forecastings, all those sorts of things. As well as that, on our AppSource Marketplace, we actually have pre-packaged. Some people have created R and Python visuals, and you can download them just like custom visuals, and you can see examples of ones that have been created for you as well. We're nearly done. We're nearly done. So that's all of the AI side. So those are all the AI features. So I mentioned lots and lots there, but the important thing is there are visuals like key influencers, using R visuals, using Python visuals. You can pull from cognitive services, from the Azure machine learning, automated machine learning that you've created. You can actually, actually I didn't show automated ML, and I will actually go back to it because I forgot to show it. Automated ML is one last thing. Sorry, I forgot to show this one. I skipped over it by accident. Automated ML is the ability to build a machine learning model via the Power BI interface. So what this is actually doing is you have the ability to select the type of machine learning that you're trying to do. I think if I go back to this screen, it should show it properly. It definitely shows it in one of these demos, and I think it's this one. 1 second, there is a good demo of this. And this is an important one, mostly because somebody asked me about this earlier and I want to show it because I think it's relevant. Automated ML, this one. I accidentally skipped over this one earlier. Okay. Load. Cool. So you have the ability to, on a data flow that you've created, say, I want to add some machine learning. I want to either do some binary prediction, some general classification, or some forecasting. What you effectively do is say, I want to look at the opportunity, and I want to, in this instance, they want to score the opportunity, and they are creating a model. They're giving it a name, giving it a description, and they're saying what they want to do, whether it's a win or a loss. So they want an opportunity, is it a win or a loss? And then effectively, they're saying, I want to train the model. That was it. They said, I've got this field. I've got a field that's already got win and loss populated in it, so I can tell it what's a success and what's a fail. It will then take a subset of the data. The way machine learning works generally is it splits the data 70-30. It says, I'm going to take 70% of your data to train my model. I'm going to keep 30% back of it to actually test the model and see what happens. So what it's actually doing is it's taking the data that you've got, looking at the data, building a machine learning model for you, using your data, training it with your data, and then giving you the ability to look at it. So if we just go through it one more time, just so you can see it happen, we're choosing a binary prediction. Binary prediction is, does it happen or not? You know, which one of the two things happens? Is this opportunity won or lost? They're just choosing to make sure they want to include the account key so they know for a particular account whether it's going to be won or lost. So zero opportunity, success means win, false means loss. And that was literally it. It'll train the model, which is the improve it, and then apply it. So if you hit OK, you then have the ability, once it's built, this is why it's skipping a few steps. That would have taken a while if I tried to demo it, which is why I'm skipping it in here. You have the ability to look at the model, see how it's scored. It gives you things like the precision, the recall. I don't want to turn this into a machine learning training session, but basically it tells you more about it, and then you have the ability to actually use that inside your solution. So this is the ability to build a machine learning model via a user interface without needing to know the data science behind it. You need to kind of understand precision and recall and things like that to know whether it's successful or a good model and things like that. So there is an element. We call them citizen data scientists as the type of people that this is aimed at, in the people that have a good understanding of the data and a basic understanding of machine learning, but they don't have the coding skills to be able to go away and write a Python script or something like that. And this is basically the people it's aimed at.
And where do you access that?
And so what that's actually done is you've got a data flow, which has got an entity on it. So in this instance, customer. It then adds that as an additional column on customer. When I create my Power BI report, I connect to that data flow, pull in my customer, connect to whatever other data and join it all up. And then it's just available as an additional field as to the prediction of the success or fail. Yeah. Once you've actually designed that, then, by the way, you then, just like I chose a cognitive service or I chose a machine learning created by the business, I can also choose one of these as well. I can choose any one of those three and say, I want to use this as my machine learning model for this data set. Right. Okay. Azure Data Services. So, as I said before, Power BI is a great self-service tool. It also has corporate users as well. So it has analysis services built in, reporting services, but it also integrates very well with the rest of the Azure Data Services. It's not a case of you can use this instead of all the Azure Data Services. It's a better together story. So let me talk to you about three examples really that it gives. So you have the ability to unify data across your organization, so centrally pull it in. In Power BI, you wouldn't be able to pull all your data from your business and store it in that one model. That's just not what it's designed for. So the whole point with the data services is you can collate data into a data lake store or a warehouse, like Dan mentioned previously, which means you can have petabytes worth of data and then use insights and advanced analytics that were talked about by both these gentlemen earlier on your data as well. So 3 customer examples on this. Reckitt Benckiser are using Power BI with Data Factory. They actually were heavy users of SQL Server integration services on premises. So this is the drag and drop interface from SQL to be able to do data transformations. You have the ability to port those SSIS packages and run them on Data Factory, which Dan showed earlier. They're using them heavily to actually do all their ETL logic and their data transformation, and then storing that data in Azure Data Lake storage, just like Dan showed, and then the Power BI reports they create are sitting on top of that. Coloplast, who are a medical supplier, use Power BI with Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Basically, they've collated all of their data into a central data warehouse. They then have their users being able to connect direct query so they can access that live petabyte scale data source to actually query and report on their data. And the last one, a retailer, Fast Shop, are using Power BI with Azure Machine Learning, and they've actually using this to pull these machine learning models that have been created for the business bespoke, and actually collating that data and pulling it into data lake storage. Behind the scenes, when you kind of integrate data flows, it actually uses data lake store behind the scenes. It's just kind of some of the intricacies behind, and so that's how they've integrated it all into one. I'm giving you the high-level tech they're using. Most of them are kind of using a number of the techs, but this is kind of the focus of what their transformation was around, either doing the transformation with Data Factory, storing their data in Data Lake, or storing their data in Data Warehouse like the one before. It tends to be using some of these technologies. And in the essence of time, I think I'm going to just open the floor for questions and say thank you all for listening. And thank you all for staying awake at 3:45 as well. I had the graveyard shift here, let's be honest with you, with everyone flagging slightly. But yeah, any questions following on from that? I think I'll be sticking around for a little bit anyway to answer a couple of questions. Otherwise, I'm going to hand the floor back to the guys.
Can I have some examples of Power Apps used in Power BI?
Examples of Power Apps used in Power BI. What sort of example? Okay. If I can remember where my mate Lee put them, yeah. So one of my sales colleagues, Lee, built this lovely demo, which is basically a Power App. Sorry, not Power App. Now it's late in the day for me. It's using Power BI apps, and it's collating lots of different solutions together. So it's got some Power BI reports in here, or some dashboards, some reports. But I believe his FSI demo has that one, I think. You can tell he's a sales guy, tell the story. Right. See, like he's got how to tell the story. So you can build things like this inside the app. This isn't the one, I think it's in this one. No, I don't think I've got with the demo. So let me try and talk about, I'm guessing the question is how I see people using them, exactly. Right? So there's a few different ways. Right back, I think, is probably the easiest story to tell. I think the largest challenge that that people see with data, if they haven't kind of worked with multidimensional in the past, or analysis of some multidimensional, is how do I integrate with the data? How do I feed something back into it to make a change and actually see an actionable change? So the ability to change a forecast number. So maybe there's some input from the sales team whereby they're actually changing their forecast or the sale for a particular item. They might do it in Excel, they might do it in SharePoint, hopefully they'll do it in something like Dynamics, really, let's be honest. But the ability sometimes for them to have that unified UI so they can change it in a Power App on the screen there, change the opportunity status, the sale amount, whatever it may be, and then actually have that feedback. Another one is a procurement from a sales perspective. We actually use the procurement stuff inside Microsoft. There's a Power BI report where you can actually see your budget for your team and what you're actually ordering and things like that. And then there's a form whereby you can choose the laptop. It kind of filters to your grade and what you can actually see and is accessible from you. And then you can choose a particular device and order, and it goes through the process rather than you having to go out to a separate place.
How does that work then? So
Kicks off a flow. So what actually happens in this particular case is rather than somebody having to go out to, so how does it work? Rather than somebody going out to a separate site or something like that and filling in a form, all it's effectively doing is it's calling the API for this sales or this procurement that's actually happening, and it's actually just basically doing that action. So what happens is the button in Power Apps is tied to a Power Automate. I should get used to calling it its name now, and that Power Automate effectively calls an API and does something. I haven't actually explained actually what Power Automate does. I've just kind of realised this at this point. It is, for anyone who's used if this then that, they'll be familiar, or if they've used Flow previously, but the whole idea is it is a process flow of what you're trying to do. So it could be connect some data, go and look something up, go and do something, is kind of in short. And then you can put conditions around it. If this, then go and do this. If this, then go and do this, and so on and so on. And so the idea is that you can then set up exactly what it's going to do. What you can then have is approval mechanisms sitting in it as well. So part of the flow that actually exists is it says, go and look up to validate to make sure this is okay. Go and send a request to the manager to approve the request for this purchase. Well, then goes off, that sends an email. The manager presses approve in the email. Basically, a form is generated by Power Automate, and they press approve. They'll then go back into the flow process to continue to the next stage. I don't know the specifics of how our thing works. I think it goes into CRM, but I don't know the exact next step. But I don't think it matters too much. It goes on to whatever kind of the next process is for that.
So going back to your report,
Yeah.
when you know, why is this so high when you're showing it on your phone?
Mm-hmm.
Where does that send it back to?
Now that, the why is it so high annotate that I did is a fire and forget. Unfortunately, the phone part is I've annotated it in something, and the action is it sends an email out to somebody, or it messages somebody, or whatever my share mechanism is, but it's not then logged back in Power BI that's actually been done. The only thing that's logged back in Power BI is commenting. So you saw it actually did a comment that said, why is this so high, Manu? That was logged in Power BI, and it would have been available in the service and in the web for both me and Manu. But the annotation stuff is kind of a fire and forget.
So if, for example, you did a report and someone was looking at that and
Yep.
going, oh, the sales figures are wrong,
Yeah.
you haven't included
Yeah.
something.
They should comment. Comment is definitely the best way to do that, for sure. And in terms of the sorry, I was not going to. Yes, commenting would be the best way to do that.
When you use Power Data Flow,
Yeah.
when you connect to Data Flow, it takes you to a different page which has a lot of data sources there.
Yeah.
There's one data source called Common Data Service.
Yeah.
What exactly that means?
Okay, when you go into Flow, there is an ability to connect to lots of different data sources, just like in Power BI. There's one in the Common Data Service. What is that? Okay, so Common Data Service is the data store that sits behind Power products. So the data store that sits behind Dynamics, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI. There's the Common Data Service that we call that sits behind it. This is the ability to have a centralized store of data that is common for all of those Power products to be able to connect to. The most common way that it's used and created is inside Dynamics, in that the forms and everything that you create effectively an entity behind it, which is a Common Data Service table that you actually use as part of your wider dynamic solution. From a Power Apps perspective, when I'm building an app, and I'm building, let's call it a model-driven app, is the way that we traditionally build it. If you talk about a model-driven app, this means that I need data for my app, right? I need my data to go somewhere. And you effectively define the entities that exist in the model. And then once you've defined your entities, you say, right, I'm going to switch to the visualization screen and use these entities and actually build it. All those entities and everything are stored in this Common Data Service. So it's basically the Power Platform's data store, I'd say, an abstraction of the data store that you see for across the Power products. So I can connect to the common data service with Power BI, Automate, Apps, Dynamics, and connect to the same source.
Do you need to create that one, or it just automatically does?
It exists as an ethereal item itself, but in terms of the creating the entities and everything in it, yes, you would need to define which entities you want to exist inside the common data service for your particular solution. So you would define an entity for Dynamics or for Power Apps or for whatever it is, and then it will be available to the other products. Does that make sense?
Yep. One last question
Go
before
on.
you go actually on that. You mentioned about paginated report.
Yep.
I think you skip over from there. So
Yep.
just brief what exactly that means.
Okay, so paginated reports are the ability to create more like a form-based report, whereby rather than you want an interactive visualization, you want to create either maybe a static table. It's a very basic way of thinking about it, but think more like a form that maybe is like a number of different pages where people want to fill things or actually see data in a particular location, or they want to output in a very specific way. Let's say, let me think of another way of putting it. What if I wanted to, let's say, generate a PDF of something, and I wanted to have some text here and a chart next to it that had something, and it's kind of it's not interactive. It's I'm generating this thing as an item you need to do, and it may be even used by some downstream process that needs it to be in a particular format or something like that, or that's the sort of thing it's used for, whereby it's not interactive. It is a kind of printed. It's not printed, but it's printed on screen, and it needs to be in a certain orientation, certain configuration. That's why we call it kind of pixel perfect. This thing needs to be in exactly this place. It's kind of.
Thank you.
Obviously, we'd recommend as much as possible to do the interactive side of it, but.
Hi, sorry. Earlier you said that you have greater control with planning your refreshes via an API. I don't suppose you have any demonstrations or evidence that we could see in front of us?
So in terms of having a particular demo, no, because I need to create a service principal, and I don't have one right this second, but I can show you what I mean. So Power BI has a number of APIs, which means you can do a number of different things with it, right? So the number of things that you can do are the ability to, actually let me zoom with this one instead. So on a data set perspective, this one here, I have the ability to refresh data set, this one right here. So what I can do is I can effectively call this API here, and I do a post on this, replacing this little section here with the name of the identifier, right? The unique identifier for my data set. And what it'll actually do is it will do a refresh at that point in time. So the second I call it. So I can call this manually, so I could have an application just with a simple button in it that does it. I could have it integrated into a Power App, into a function, into a whatever you like, anything that can call an API, as long as it can have a service principal defined on it. Basically, the service principal is the app user for AD, the way it authenticates to the application. As long as it has an ability to take a token, generate a token for that, call this API and push that token with it, that's
so
it.
Potentially a PowerShell script.
Yep. PowerShell
like
script is the simplest way, and I don't know why I didn't say it first.
Thank you.
PowerShell script would have been the way I would have, yeah, the PowerShell script. Yeah, that's how I would do it with Data Factory, by the way. I would just call it PowerShell script. Or I would use Azure Automate. Why am I forgetting about one of our products? Azure Automate has the ability for you to call a thing on a schedule. But the reason I like it with Data Factory is because you can call it after an ETL process finishes, because running it at 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. or whatever it is not necessarily the best thing to do if you've got a refresh process that takes 10 minutes one time, an hour the next time. So kicking it off afterwards is pretty common. That's what gives you more flexibility. It does not increase the frequency with which you can do it. If you're on a pro license, you can still only do it 8 times per day, and if you're on premium, you can still only do it 48 times per day. But you just control when it happens, not on the 30-minute or on the 0, which are your choices in Power BI. You either choose it on the 0, 0 or on the 30 of each hour, and that's it. With the API, you do it whenever you like.
Is there any plans to increase the number of...
Not at this point in time.
at all?
No. The idea is that you would move to a different technology. So you would move most likely to using direct query, and you would actually access the data real time. Or that's for, sorry, let me be clear about this, because people overuse the use of real time. Live query and direct query are a near real time solution. Just to be a stickler on this, because some people annoy me by calling that real time, which means that your import mode as frequently as every 30 minutes. That's it. That's as frequently as you're going to get. Now, you can get more frequently by going to analysis services, but you still need to think, even with an incremental refresh and analysis services, if the model's quite large, are you really going to get it much smaller than that? So again, probably not the right solution. So we move to near real time, where we talk about connecting to a SQL database or whatever it may be, and you can connect direct query to that. This is where you need to probably think about things like data warehouse, where it's much larger, much more powerful in terms of capable of doing it, but there's a cost associated to do it. Trade-off, right? Money being the obvious one. And then the last one is real time. Real time is using the push data set. As you saw squirreled away on the API here, there was actually a push data set down here. This is actually pushing the data into Power BI, which means that the data is rendered real time in Power BI. If you put it on a dashboard in Power BI, it refreshes sub-second, which means that as you're pushing data in there, it redraws sub-second, so you're actually seeing data as it flows in. And so for an IoT-based solution, people do it one of two ways. They either use the push data set directly, which means that they call the API directly, they have an application that writes out to Power BI, or they use things like Azure Stream Analytics. We don't want to mention too many data tools, but this is another data tool that wasn't mentioned, is you use things like event hubs or IoT hubs to collate data from your ingestion source, and you use Stream Analytics to pull the data from that queuing mechanism. These ones were mentioned, by the way, the queues were mentioned. You pull it from Stream Analytics and you push it into Power BI. You basically write a piece of code, a piece of SQL basically, to be honest with you. It's just called Stream Analytics SQL. And you basically run like a select statement or something like that, and you say output to Power BI, and it writes it out to a data set. And again, it will be sub-second, and it's as fast as you scale that write mechanism. But that's real time.
By having the data gateway on your import, refresh, does it not give you a live update on that, on your data?
Does a gateway give you live updates? So, a gateway is used to access an on-premises data source. So, if you're connecting to a cloud data source, any of our Azure services, plus a web connector, an OData connector, whatever it is, that will use a cloud gateway, and you don't need a gateway, except in security scenarios that I will not talk about right now. In a case we're connected to on-premises data sources, you connect to a gateway. The fact that it uses import or direct query is purely dependent upon the model you've built in Power BI. So in Power BI, when you connect to a data source, I didn't do the demo, but when I connect to a data source, I choose live or direct query. Direct query or import mode. Let me stick on that again. With import mode, the gateway will basically you can schedule to do a refresh. And so when it goes through the gateway, it will then happen on whatever that frequency is. For live query, it will go through the gateway if you chose live query as your connection. But that's all it's doing, it's just going through the gateway. So it doesn't change whether it's direct or live query. That's chosen at build time of the report itself. The gateway is purely a facilitation between an on-premises source and the cloud. Okay. What was the question there?
Yeah. If I'm using direct query within the organization, is there a way that I could perform data manipulation to the existing data set? Let's say I've got a link to a SQL box, local SQL box. For example, I've got a particular date fields that are stored in, day, month, year, and then hour, minute. But I've noticed before when I actually change the actual data type, it then prompts me to say, well, direct query is no longer available, or if I perform any DEX sort of calculations on top of it. Is there a way to get around that?
So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is not sure if I would. So the short answer of yes is File, Options and Settings, Options. Direct. Please say we haven't removed it. There was a current file, direct query. Have we removed the blooming feature? Oh. There used to be a tick box like there that said allow unlimited queries. Apparently we removed it. I didn't like the tick box anyway, which is why I went with the longer answer anyway. So what I would say is there is a limitation as to the DAX calculations that you can do. There's two ways to solve this. You can create a view inside the database to actually do the kind of the transformation of things like the date logic that you're trying to do there, and then actually just connect to the view. You can also create a store procedure and connect to the store procedure if you prefer, or you can write a SQL query. And in the connector, rather than when you connect to a database, you can actually just choose to connect with query. So what you can do is you can say get data SQL server, and you can expand the box at the bottom and just specify the SQL query directly. So you can just write it and type it in there, and you can put it in there. Now, in terms of a date transformation, as far as I'm aware, date is a push-down ability. So you should be able to redefine something from a date time to a date, I think. Now, your stuff in DAX, you're right, you won't be able to use same period last year and those sorts of functionalities. You'd have to use import mode for that. What I would consider is, do you need to use direct query? Whilst I'm an advocate of it in terms of the size of models that you can have and what it gives you, I would be a little bit careful in terms of the performance that you'll actually get from it when it's used at scale, because you need to make sure your database is optimized for all of the Power BI queries that are generated. Now, Power BI will translate DAX and all the transformations into SQL, but it's not going to deliver it into the most optimal SQL for various reasons, because it's kind of generic in how it does it. So you need to be careful that your database is optimized for the Power BI generated SQL, and it's quite important about that.
Okay, great, thank you.
This is turning into a Power BI Q&A, and I'm kind of conscious these guys look like they want to come on and actually close off. I'm happy to answer. I talk about Power BI all day, I love it. So I love it so much. I'm flying to the US next week to talk about Power BI there. I just talk about it anywhere someone let me talk, I'll talk about it. All right, cool. Any more questions, give me a shout. Otherwise, thank you very much.